Hurt my friend. Good luck with your education. I recognize this is long. Feel free to skip if you don't have the time or patience. Smiling face with sunglasses. Also, if this more petty than pro, I can move it. Back in the before times when the internet was still a new thing with lots of potential, I was enrolled at my local junior college. A little into the semester, I moved in with my GF so we could both save on rent. I will call my girlfriend Lucy for the purposes of this post. One night Lucy says she invited a friend from one of her classes for a game night. Sounded good to me. We invited a couple of other friends and it was a really fun night. Surprisingly, it turned out her friend Sarah was someone I knew from high school. We weren't close friends, but we knew each other and got along fine. After that night, Sarah was invited over pretty frequently for dinner, game nights, or to watch a movie. She even brought her boyfriend over a couple of times. I'll call him Jay, but he never quite fit in. He would be quiet and or standoffish, wouldn't engage much, and just seemed like he never wanted to be there. It was clear no one really felt comfortable having him there, but we invited him to be polite to Sarah. Fortunately, he only came over 2 or 3 times, and found an excuse to refuse every other time. A month or 2 after this all started, Sarah called my GF crying and asked if she could come over. Of course we said yes. The story that was relayed was Jay was getting very upset with Sarah for coming over to our place so frequently and accused her of cheating on him. She never clarified if he thought she was cheating with me, Lucy, or both, but any option was ridiculous and never happened. But he confronted her and started verbally assaulting her, calling her all kinds of nasty names. At one point she tried to walk past him to leave, and he shoved her back. This caused her to trip over a coffee table, fall, and get a huge bruise on her butt and lower back. Lucy told me about the bruise as Sarah had shown her. I didn't see it for myself. Sarah swore up and down that he had never physically assaulted her before, and she believed it was just an accident, but I was pissed. I wanted revenge. You don't mess with my friends and you don't assault women. I wanted to beat the crap out of him, but while I'm a very big guy, I've never been in a fight and am not a violent person, but a revenge plan formed in my mind. At the time, I was working in the administration building of the school as a student employee. As part of my job, I could access anyone's student records, their fees, and their class schedule. The date was fast approaching. That was the last possible day to drop or add classes without penalty or specific permission. So I looked Jay up in the system, got his student ID number and the other information that I needed, and put my plan into motion. On the last day to change schedules, I used the dedicated enrollment phones in the administration building. Internet class scheduling wasn't a thing that was set up yet, and canceled all of his classes. Not only that, but I went through and added every class I could find that had a course fee. If you owed a debt at the school, you couldn't get copies or your transcripts or anything else. Something that I didn't mention was that Jay was a foreign student and couldn't stay in the country if he wasn't enrolled with a certain number of units. I wish I could give more info about the fallout, but as I didn't want to get this traced back to me, I didn't tell anyone, nor did I pull up his records again for quite a while. I did get a little payoff though. Sarah was really worried about seeing him again. She had broken up with him the night after he pushed her, as they had an English class together on Tuesdays. She said that on Tuesday he was there, but there was also someone new standing in the class. He was standing because there weren't enough seats. The teacher, seeing that there were more people than should be held roll, and guess who wasn't on it? You're right, it was Jay. Apparently after I dropped all his classes, someone on the wait list got in. Jay tried to argue with the teacher, but as Teach had the official class roster and Jay wasn't on it, there was nothing he could do. Sarah said she never saw Jay in that class again. I don't know much more about what happened. Lucy and I eventually broke up, so I didn't see Sarah very often after that. After a while, I did look up Jay's class schedule, and all of the classes with course fees were gone, but he didn't have any other classes on the books either. I wanted to assume he was kicked out of school, but I didn't try to confirm it. Either way, Sarah didn't have to have a class with him, and while he probably deserved more, he was definitely inconvenienced and possibly kicked out of school. Sometimes I worry I was too harsh, but then I remember that he deserved it. Mess with me, but not my friends. When I was a young man of just 18, I got a job in the Canadian oil patch. It was my first real job. It was the early 2000s and this paid 20/HR with no experience or education required. Min wage was sub $6. It was called well testing. Basically, you hook up a closed pressure tank and flare stacked to new oil and gas wells, then flow them, gather data for the oil barons. It's hard work setting up and tearing down, but the rest is recording gauges and computer work. Not bad for a first job, except for fucking Gary. You work 2-man 12 HR or 4-man 24 HR crews, 1 laborer and 1 supervisor a shift. I was paired with a mean-spirited alcoholic in his mid-50s named Gary. He was overweight and lazy, only helping with things too heavy to lift on my own, like 250 lb pipes. He spent his days in the trailer for the most part anyway, watching DVDs, napping, and hourly typing a bit of data into a PC. He also liked picking on me with jokes, insults. I'm not a small man, about 6'1" in heels. He was noticeably smaller, yet while not physically intimidated, back then I lacked confidence and have a baby face. I got called stupid a lot. When he found out I had never used a power drill, he asked me, "Didn't your dad teach you anything?" I made the error of telling him my dad was only in my life a handful of years. The next time I made a mistake, he quipped, "No wonder my dad walked out on me." I did call him out on that. Like every other asshole alive, he'd tell me I couldn't take a joke. We always worked far out of town in the country. I often had to eat dinner with him in small town restaurants, mostly bars if we could help it. He drank a lot, could actually be personable when not at work, and he was at least too deep. He didn't stop and drank every night. It quickly became the case that I drove us to work in his truck. He made $1 or $1.10 per kilometer, and we could drive 350 km per day, every day for weeks. 100 miles equals 160 kilometers, FYI. I got minimum wage for travel time. He was hungover most mornings, didn't want to drive, and told me he was boss. He slept like a gin-bloated corpse until we got to work. I worked with him for 3 months. 3 months of demeaning treatment and verbal abuse. I don't react much. It's still true, everyone has their breaking point. I was very used to bullying by then. Long story, I just get silent. I also needed the job. I don't anything until I do, and I don't do nothing forever. Part 1. The Power of Love. The first step in my quest for vengeance was remembering that it's impossible to defeat evil with the power of love. Part 2. The Power of Terror. One night while we out of town on a job during dinner, I mentioned to Gary it's pretty lame he sleeps most of the time while I drive his truck and he gets paid. Maybe he ought to kick a few bucks my way for the effort. He didn't like my suggestion he be generous. The last hinge must have crumbled because he came unglued. More verbal abuse, and I was young. It actually reduced me to angry tears. When he threatened my job, it was a bad feeling. So I resolved to at least get away from him. I'd been taking notes because I wanted a different crew anyway. My breaking point was achieved. This is usually when my instinct for self-preservation diminishes and impulsive thoughts have fewer safeguards. I wanted to go home, not revenge, but serendipity delivered the next morning. Gary was once again in his travel coma, and I drove us to work. About 30 km from side of the highway on a pullout was a semi-truck. Luck would also have it. It was running and trucker was outside his rig. I quickly formulated a plan. Gary always needed to be woken with intent, so he didn't stir when I stopped, got out and asked the friendly driver for a favor. Trucker man agreed to my terms, got back in his semi to await the signal. Gary, blissfully sleeping off the last of his nightly whiskey, also failed to notice when I maneuvered his truck. Parking it, we were nearly bumper to bumper facing the big, beautiful Peterbilt. I lit the beacon. The truckers of Rohan answered with their own headlights. Like the horn of Helm Hammerhand sounding in the deep, the trucker hit his air horn with amazing commitment to instilling fear. I did my part by honking Gary's truck gleefully in respite and screaming my ass off. I cried bloody murder at blast level and yelled, "Fuck, we're gonna die." Striking like a battalion of bombers singing a chorus of fire, the glorious cacophony lasted less than a minute. When it hit him, Gary dented the ceiling. Good thing he's thick as cement, or that might have hurt. He rocketed up with such force because the amount of shit he rapidly expelled into his pants kept him in debt to his own bowels until retirement. The wonderful sound of his anguished howls segued quickly into apoplexy and rage. While coming to terms with what I had done, he couldn't correctly choke out his death threats. I reversed, peeled off before he decided to get out to make good, and gave the trucker a wave. I got about 10 m down the road when Gary felt the need to tell me he had dangerously high blood pressure, and I could have killed him with a stroke. About 4 years later, I went to paramedic school, so yes, in hindsight I agree with his assessment. Sucks for him. At 18, I had legitimately no idea what a stroke was. What would I even do? Probably ignore him like they did with Stalin. I think he was just extra hungover, or being lazier than usual by pretending half his body was paralyzed. Deed. I started laughing and told him he should probably calm down then. I said, "Can't you take a joke?" He kept making incomplete threats and I just couldn't stop laughing, making it even funnier when he wouldn't shut up. Don't feed it, Gary. I love ugly laughing at angry people. I was a hyena. He was fighting the urge to kill me and the desire to not stroke out simultaneously. The struggle was real. It took about 20 men more to get to site. That dance continued the whole time. I even asked him if that was his normal shade of red. Arriving, he ordered me to get out, said I was fired, then stomped off to go call the company owner. Whatever. I had intermittent chuckles and smoked cigarettes while savoring my Pyrrhic victory for the 4 hours it took the company owner to come pick me up. It was a medium-sized business, about 100 employees. He was the GM as well. I got some details. Gary wanted to involve the cops for attempted murder. Boss dissuaded him. Gary told one hell of a tale that left me looking like Satan. So I told him all about the necessity of Gary's punishment on the way back to the city. He had a good chuckle about it. He was actually a decent guy. I worked for him until I went back to school. I got moved to a different crew where I could be the lone sociopath. That's about it. I did get some street cred with the rest of the boys at the company. TLDR. I tricked my work bully into thinking he was dying in a motor vehicle collision with a semi-truck. The HOA president's long goodbye. Posting on behalf of a friend who isn't on Reddit. This is for you, Jake. When I moved into my suburban neighborhood, I expected peace and quiet. Instead, I walked into a petty dictatorship run by our HOA president, Todd. Todd was the worst kind of leader, the kind who loved power but hated accountability. He enforced ridiculous rules, like fining people $200 for leaving their trash cans out a minute past 9:00 a.m., but blatantly ignored the rules when it suited him. His own yard was a mess of unpermitted structures, and his fence was taller than allowed by city ordinances. But Todd's true sin, using the HOA as his personal piggy bank. At first I tried reasoning with him. My fence was slightly off color because the approved stain wasn't available, and he fined me $500. I explained, provided receipts, and asked for leniency. Todd smirked, said, "Rules are rules," and walked away. That's when I decided I would take him down, not with screaming or public arguments, but methodically, legally, and in a way he'd never recover from. Step 1. Become the inside man. Todd's first mistake was underestimating me. I volunteered for the HOA board under the guise of wanting to get involved in the community. I played the part of the eager, naive newbie perfectly. For 2 years, I attended every meeting, quietly observing how Todd operated. I learned he controlled the board by bullying other members and burying them in paperwork. He'd push through votes when only his allies were present and conveniently lose paperwork submitted by dissenting homeowners. I kept my head down, took detailed notes, and waited. My goal was to outlast his term as president so I could begin making changes. Then I discovered Todd's second mistake. He wasn't just a bully, he was a thief. Step 2. Follow the money. Todd loved to brag about how he kept the HOA's finances in order, but something didn't add up. The annual HOA fees were high, much higher than in similar neighborhoods, but the common areas were falling apart. The pool was closed half the summer due to maintenance issues, and the landscaping looked like it hadn't been touched in months. I started digging. As the HOA treasurer, Todd had access to all the accounts, but he was notoriously cagey about sharing financial details. I asked for the budget during a meeting, and Todd laughed it off, saying, "Don't worry, I've got it under control." I filed a formal request for the financial records, which, under HOA rules, he was required to provide. Weeks went by with no response. That's when I started talking to neighbors. Turns out, I wasn't the only one suspicious. Over a dozen homeowners had requested access to the budget over the years, only to be ignored. One neighbor claimed Todd had used HOA funds to install a new patio at his house, while another swore he'd seen Todd's kids at the community pool during its maintenance closure. Armed with these suspicions, I filed a formal complaint with the HOA board, forcing Todd to provide the records. He stalled, but I wasn't backing down. Step 3. Build the case. When Todd finally handed over the financial documents, they were a mess. Invoices were missing, payments were mislabeled, and some expenses were downright bizarre. A $15,000 landscaping fee paid to a company that didn't exist. Thousands spent on administrative costs with no explanation. I cross-referenced the HOA's bank statements with public records and found the smoking gun. Todd was funneling money to his personal accounts. Even better, I discovered Todd had been inflating contractor fees, pocketing the difference, and splitting the profits with his buddy, a shady contractor who handled most of the HOA's maintenance. I compiled everything into a detailed report, complete with spreadsheets, photos, and notarized statements from neighbors who had seen Todd's antics firsthand. Step 4. The coup. I waited for the annual HOA meeting, which was typically a snooze fest attended by only a handful of homeowners. But this time, I made sure people showed up. I spent weeks knocking on doors, explaining what Todd had been up to. I didn't share everything, just enough to get people angry and curious. On the night of the meeting, the room was packed. Todd started the meeting like usual, droning on about how difficult it was to manage the HOA and how much he'd sacrificed for the community. That's when I stood up. I calmly asked if he could explain some discrepancies in the budget. Todd laughed nervously and said, "I don't think this is the time or place." I replied, "Actually, Todd, it's the perfect time." I handed out copies of my report to everyone in the room. The mood shifted instantly. People started reading, whispering, and then shouting. Todd tried to regain control, but it was too late. I called for a vote to remove him as president. By the end of the night, Todd was out. Step 5. The final blow. After Todd was removed, we hired an independent auditor to go through the HOA's finances. They confirmed everything. Todd had embezzled over $50,000, mismanaged tens of thousands more, and committed multiple counts of fraud. We reported him to the police and filed a civil lawsuit to recover the stolen funds. But it didn't end there. Todd's shady contractor buddy was also exposed and banned from doing business in the county. Todd had to sell his house to pay restitution and legal fees. His name became a running joke in the neighborhood, and no one would touch him professionally. With Todd gone, we restructured the HOA to prevent another dictator from taking over. We implemented term limits, required multiple board members to approve financial decisions, and created an online portal so all homeowners could access budgets and meeting minutes. The aftermath. Every time I walk past Todd's old house, now owned by a lovely family, I smile. The pool is open, the landscaping is beautiful, and the HOA fees are lower than ever. Todd, meanwhile, moved to a neighboring town where he reportedly tried to join another HOA board, only to be laughed out of the room when someone Googled his name. Justice wasn't just served, it was plated, garnished, and savored. You want special treatment? I would love to. Buckle up, this is a long one. Once upon the before time in 2015, I worked my way through nursing school as a waitress in a restaurant. This restaurant did not advertise. They prided themselves on word of mouth for their popularity. This is important. I had been there for several months at this point, and had proved myself reliable and knowledgeable enough to help train new waiters. Not technically a trainer, but could be relied upon to support new workers once the trainers set them loose. We had one older guy who had just been released. He was a little awkward, little shy, and worried about mistakes absolutely expected, and he was great to work with. On the night of our tale, he was in the section next to mine. Easy to keep an eye on and easy to hop in and prop him up when he hit the weeds. This was his first night with his own complete section. Weeds would abound. I was ready. What he wasn't ready for was his first demanding round table of about 6 people, 20-somethings with attitude. He came to me worried and confused. They want Zais, but I don't think that's on our menu, right? She says we have the ingredients and just make it, that the other location makes it all the time. Yes, I could have taught him to stand his ground, but nerves and first night with your own section isn't the time for this to go over well. So I told him ask the back line and see if they were willing. If not, I would talk to the table. Cooks were fine with it, basically a wrap if I remember correctly, so no problem from our end. This was apparently the cue for the leader of the table to demand something every time he came to the table. As soon as he brought the last requested item, she needed something else. I thought it was possible and had been keeping an eye on him. Seeing his panicked face, I gave him a nod and started checking in on his other tables, slotting them into my own table cycles, reasons I'm paired with him. This carried on for their entire meal, incredibly needy and demanding his full attention with zero apology or kindness. I made sure to catch him in the back to prepare for possibly getting no tip, but to calm the panic, and to remind him I would not be touching the tips from his other tables. Honestly, this poor guy looked like he was about to quit on the spot. This leader was rude and impatient and gave him no space to breathe. I was his emotional support animal at this point, but knowing he was at least twice my age made it even worse for him. The table had come in close to the end of the night and ended up staying past our section's closing, so they were the last table on our side of the restaurant. Perks of closing with a new waiter getting cut early. That's when he came to me asking how to do an employee discount, and they wanted to use more than one on a single ticket. Was that okay? I was confused. Wait, employee. That's when he shared that she had spent the entire meal berating and making fun of him because 1, she was a trainer at our other location, and 2, he was the worst waiter she had ever seen. No wonder the other location made her special meals, and zero surprise he was such a wreck. On top of that, she was claiming there were multiple birthdays in the group, so free cakes all around, and she wants the birthday song immediately. To say I was livid is saying lava is warm. I was ready to throw hands for this poor man. Instead, I told him to prep the cakes but don't go out yet. I would get the boss about employee discount, not needed. We could do it ourselves, but this was such a special case, and I would gather the workers for the birthday song. Managers there were absolutely amazing. We loved each one and all of them had our backs. Very rare in restaurants, so this almost the best part. I gave the front-end boss a quick rundown of the table's antics. Remember the word of mouth, restaurant mentality. Yeah, boss was not having a restaurant employee acting so cruelly, even if she wasn't his employee. I asked permission for what I wanted to do. He smiled and gave permission as he grabbed the employee numbers given for the discounts, which that trainer would have known could not be stacked, and told me he had a boss-to-boss phone call to make. I then ran to every employee I could grab. Remember, half the restaurant was closing down, so we had several people available, including a dishwasher, and gave them each the FASTEST explanation of the table and the plan. And then I told the poor nerve-wracked server that we were ready to drop cakes. The crowd that arrived to that 6-person tabletop was honestly the largest we had ever had for a birthday song, and I am pretty confident the largest that restaurant will ever have. We served free cakes in front of every seat, and leader had the most self-satisfied smirk as we all grinned ecstatically and lined up to sing. And oh, did we sing! We all sang that birthday song as loud as possible. Please do recall they were the last table in the section, and for your imaginings, I should mention this table was in the corner as well. So while we were screaming the birthday song, it was bouncing back from that corner as well, and it was an excruciatingly long song. Their smiles dropped immediately, and hands covered their ears as they jumped with the audio onslaught. I know it hurt my ears, and that pain is something that still makes me smile to this day. We all stood there, giant group, happily screaming our restaurant's special happy birthday song, and it still warms my heart a decade later. More than that, while we were gathering and planning and destroying eardrums, our boss was making phone calls in the office. Yes, he called her restaurant manager and informed them of her behavior. And no, she didn't get stacked employee discounts. She didn't get her discount at all. I know because I was there when she was handed the phone from my front-end manager at the host desk, and when she started to cry and tried to make her excuses for why she shouldn't be fired. But the general manager, one step below owner, since this was a small company with very few locations, had already been called, her employee number had been shared, and she was done. I'm not psychic. She could have gone back to her home location and convinced someone to hire her back. Anything is possible. But I know how she treated this poor guy. I know how I told the tale to my boss, and I know the quiet rage he so rarely touched when it was rage. I would have almost given up joining in that screaming song to be able to hear those phone calls. Almost.